Texas Secession, a complex decision. In this episode, we'll explore the political, economic, and social factors behind Texas secession, the key events that shaped this decision, and even the contemporary debate over whether Texas could or should secede again. Let's get started. To understand why Texas chose to secede, we first need to look at the political climate of the early 1860s. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was a turning point. Lincoln was a Republican, and his party opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. For southern states like Texas, this was seen as a direct threat to their way of life and their economic system, which relied heavily on enslaved labor. South Carolina was the first state to secede, leaving the Union in December 1860. This set off a chain reaction across the South. For Texas, the fear was clear. If slavery was restricted or abolished, the economic foundation of the state and the entire South would collapse. These fears, combined with a belief in states' rights, pushed Texas to follow South Carolina's lead. Economically, slavery was deeply entrenched in Texas, especially in the eastern parts of the state, where large plantations dominated the landscape. Cotton was king, and enslaved labor was the engine that made it profitable. While not every Texan owned enslaved people, the institution of slavery shaped the state's economy and society in profound ways. But it's important to note that Texas wasn't a monolith. In the western and frontier regions, there were fewer enslaved people and less economic reliance on slavery. These areas often had different attitudes towards secession compared to the plantation-heavy eastern regions. Politically, the secession debate was shaped by fierce divisions. The Democratic Party, which dominated Texas politics at the time, was split between northern and southern factions. But there were notable opponents, including Sam Houston, the governor of Texas at the time. Houston warned that secession would lead to war and devastate the South. But his efforts to keep Texas in the Union ultimately failed. The pressure from pro-secession leaders and the rising tide of Southern nationalism proved too strong. Many Texans felt that their loyalty to the Southern cause outweighed their allegiance to the United States. By January 1861, tensions had reached a breaking point. A special secession convention was called in Austin, where delegates from across the state gathered to decide Texas's future. These delegates were overwhelmingly pro-secession, and on February 1, 1861, they voted in favor of leaving the Union. However, the decision wasn't final until it was put to a public referendum. On February 23, Texans went to the polls, and the results were clear. More than 75% of voters supported secession. Governor Sam Houston refused to take an oath of allegiance to the Confederacy and was removed from office, marking the end of an era for one of Texas's most iconic leaders. The secession referendum and its aftermath had profound consequences for Texas. The state's economy became fully aligned with the Confederacy, and thousands of Texans joined the Confederate Army. But not everyone supported the decision. Unionist sentiment remained strong in some parts of the state, particularly in German immigrant communities and among small farmers who had little to gain from slavery. The Civil War would devastate Texas and the South as a whole, leaving scars that would take generations to heal. For many, the decision to secede was seen as a tragic mistake, driven by the interests of a powerful minority rather than the will of all Texans. The question of Texas secession didn't end with the Civil War. In fact, it's a topic that continues to spark debate today. Let's explore the arguments for and against modern Texas secession. On the pro-secession side, advocates argue that Texas has a unique history as an independent republic before joining the U.S. in 1845. They claim that the federal government has overstepped its bounds, infringing on states' rights and failing to represent Texas's interests. Some also believe that Texas, with its robust economy and natural resources, could thrive as an independent nation. But critics of secession point out several challenges. Economically, Texas is deeply tied to the rest of the United States, relying on federal funding for infrastructure, disaster relief, and education. Politically, secession would create instability, and legally, it's considered unconstitutional. The Supreme Court ruled in Texas v. White in 1869 that secession is not allowed, declaring the Union indissoluble. Despite these obstacles, secessionist movements like the Texas Nationalist Movement have gained attention in recent years, particularly during times of federal political discord. In 2021, a bill was introduced in the Texas legislature proposing a referendum on independence, though it failed to gain traction. Opponents argue these efforts are more about political posturing than realistic plans for independence. At its core, The modern debate over Texas secession reflects ongoing tensions between state and federal power, as well as the enduring legacy of the Civil War. As we've seen, the story of Texas secession is one of deep divisions: political, economic, and social. In 1861, Texas left the Union to protect slavery and the interests of a powerful elite, setting the stage for its role in the Civil War. Today, debates over secession continue, raising questions about sovereignty, unity, and the legacy of the past. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out my other videos on the political history of Texas. Until next time, I'm your host, and this is Texas History and Politics Uncovered.